Update. Parents spent my hard-earned retirement savings on my sister's house, so I cut them off financially. Original post. The reason for writing this is because I, 33 male, feel financially exploited by my parents. My dad, 68, and mum, 65, worked hard all their lives and did their best to raise my sister, 29 female, and me. We weren't rich, but they made sure we never went without essentials and provided us with a good education. As adults, the dynamics in our family shifted, especially with my sister Ken. She was always the golden child, coddled and pampered, while I was expected to be responsible and independent. My parents excused her behavior, no matter how selfish or entitled, saying things like, "She's just sensitive," or "She'll grow out of it." But Ken never did. Instead, she became more entitled. In her teens, she started demanding more. First clothes, then a car, and later money for vacations. My parents always obliged, even when Ken got married at 21 to a guy equally entitled. My parents funded their lavish wedding, arguing that since Ken didn't attend college, they should invest in her wedding. I was expected to pay my own way through college and took out loans, which I'm still paying off. I didn't complain. I figured that's just how things were. As the years passed, I became more financially successful, working hard and making good investments. Eventually, I landed a well-paying job. My parents retired when Dad was 63, relying partly on their pension and partially on the financial support I provided each month. They claimed to have some savings for emergencies, but I doubted it, given how Ken constantly extorted money from them. I didn't mind helping them because I wanted to give back to those who raised me. They needed help with bills, medical expenses, and general living costs, and I was happy to contribute. While supporting them, I was concerned about their retirement. Their savings weren't substantial, so I set up a savings account specifically for them, contributing a portion of my salary each month. I told them about it, and they were pleased with my thoughtfulness. They had access to that account, using only part of it while saving the rest. A few months ago, Ken called with urgent news. She was pregnant with her third child. She and her husband had been eyeing a new, spacious house in an upscale neighborhood, far beyond their means, and Ken insisted they needed it for the new baby. Then came the bombshell. "Mum and Dad think it would be a great idea if you could help us buy the house." I was stunned, not just by the request, but by the audacity. I was more shocked to learn that my parents had suggested the idea. I politely declined, reminding her that both she and her husband were working. Ken didn't take it well. Later, my parents invited me over for dinner. As soon as I sat down, they started pressuring me to help Ken. Their argument was that Ken needed a bigger house, that her children deserved to grow up in a good neighborhood, and that, as her older brother, it was my duty to help her out. I couldn't believe my parents, whom I had been supporting for years, were asking me to drain my savings to buy my sister a luxury she couldn't afford on her own. I refused, explaining that I had my own priorities, and while I was willing to help with smaller things, buying her a house was out of the question. My parents didn't take my refusal kindly and tried to manipulate me, saying that Ken lived in a cramped apartment with 2 kids and that the third was on the way. They implied it was my responsibility to ensure her children's safety by buying her a house. I lost my temper, saying Ken should have considered her financial situation before having more kids or marrying so early. The argument escalated and I eventually left the dinner midway. Since that night, things have been tense. My parents stopped calling as often, and when they did, the conversations were cold. I know I haven't done anything wrong, but their reactions make me feel like the bad guy. I know my sister is in bad financial shape, But does that mean I'm obligated to buy her a house? I don't think so. My reaction for OP. I see why OP's upset. Ken is using what can best be described as emotional blackmail by getting her parents to pressure OP to financially support her and her growing family. It's OP's finances, and only OP can decide if he wants to help. If the parents want to support Ken themselves with their own money, then that's their decision. Now for the updates. Update 1. You won't believe what happened a month ago. I noticed something strange. The retirement account I had been saving for my parents was suddenly emptied. All the money I had put aside for them was gone. I panicked, thinking the account might have been hacked or scammed. I called my parents immediately and asked if they had lost the debit card or if they had shared the details with someone. Mum answered the phone, and when I told her about the theft, she was evasive. I could tell something was off. I asked if she knew about it, and she denied it. However, when I pestered her and said I was going to involve the cops, she admitted that she had lent the money to my aunt, her sister, who needed it for a medical emergency. My aunt and I aren't particularly close, but I know she's had health issues in the past, so I believed her. Still, something didn't sit right with me as to why my mum lied to me in the first place, but then I let it slide. A week later, I was thinking about the money I was about to put into that account this month. I realised I hadn't checked on my aunt in ages, so I decided to give her a call. To my surprise, rather shock, she told me that my mum had been out of touch with her for many months. When I mentioned the money, she was completely confused. She had no idea what I was talking about and assured me she hadn't asked my parents for anything. I instantly knew what had happened to my money. I immediately drove home and asked them directly, "You gave away the money to Ken, didn't you?" Mum tried to dodge the bullet, saying, "No, we gave it to your aunt." I snapped at her to stop the BS and told her I had spoken to my aunt. Then Mum broke down and confessed they had given the money to Ken to buy the house she wanted. My fears came true and I freaked out. Are you guys out of your minds? You gave away the retirement money to your stupid daughter, and how are you going to manage your expenses in old age? Did you think about that? She sobbed and said, "We thought we had you." I screamed, "Have me? What am I? Some kind of wealthy god who prints money in my backyard? What if I marry a woman who doesn't want to work and I have to take care of her? What about the responsibilities I have after having children? How could I juggle so many things?" Mum was short of an answer, but Dad jumped in to defend her. "Well, we had to do this because you refused to help. You denied buying a house for Ken, remember? Son, you can abandon your sister, but we cannot turn away from our daughter. She needs a house more than we need that money." I was flabbergasted at his response. "Oh really? She needs the house more than you need retirement money? So basically, I'm a fool for having lived frugally for the last 10 years and saved this fund for you guys." It would be an understatement if I said I felt disheartened. I was furious. All the money I had saved for them, their safety net, was gone, spent on a luxury my sister can't afford. Yes, that's right, a basic need like a home is no less than a luxury for Ken because she cannot afford an apartment in a good neighbourhood. I told them that what they had done was incredibly irresponsible and that they had betrayed my trust. They tried to defend themselves, saying they had done it for the family, that they had no choice, and that I had forced their hand by refusing to help. The gaslighting was intense. They twisted the situation, making it seem like I was the one who had abandoned them. Like I was the villain for not bending to their will. I couldn't believe it. I had been the one supporting them for years, and yet they were making me out to be the bad guy. I was at my wit's end. I slumped on the couch, not knowing what to do. Mum came to calm me down. She tried her emotional tactics to make me feel better. She told me that the registration of the new house was in a week and now they couldn't withdraw the funds from Ken. I was like, hold on, The house is yet to be purchased, right? Poor me thought I could somehow save my hard-earned money. I tried to convince them of the importance of retirement money, giving various examples of relatives and neighbours who had died in poverty due to money shortages. They were partially convinced, but they were apprehensive, or probably scared, to ask Ken to return the money. I said, I'll do it. Call her home. So Mum called her, asking her to come down as something urgent needed to be discussed. She came over and I tried to knock some sense into her head that buying a house out of our parents' safety fund wasn't a good idea. Instead, they should save up and buy something within their budget. But she's an entitled woman. How could she let go of the money she had already conquered? She put her foot down and said she was not going to return it. In fact, she said she had already made the payment, so she couldn't return it. Our discussion blew up into an ugly fight. I also stood my ground and told my parents that unless they withdrew the money and put it back into the retirement account, I would cut them off financially. No more help with bills, no more money for groceries, nothing. I didn't want to do it, but I felt like I had no other choice. They needed to understand the consequences of their actions. Ken came to the rescue, assuring them not to worry and that she would take care of them if I cut them off. She said it in such a casual, flippant way as if it was no big deal. My parents latched on to her words like a lifeline. I knew better. Ken had never been responsible for anything in her life. She was used to taking, not giving. I warned my parents that they were making a huge mistake, but they wouldn't listen. They were convinced that Ken would come through for them, and nothing I said could change their minds. I cannot fathom how foolish people can be. Ken and her husband are barely able to make ends meet. How would they take care of our parents? Yes, moving to their own house from the apartment would save them the rent, but is that money enough to take care of our parents? Plus, they would have a mortgage to pay. The money my parents gave to her would barely cover 40% of the price. But she is a delusional being. Not only she, but her husband too, has zero financial planning. The confrontation made me dizzy and I ultimately stormed out, with my last words that, from now on, they shouldn't count on me for any financial needs whatsoever. It's been a couple of weeks since then. I was hoping for some sort of miracle, that they would withdraw the money, but it doesn't happen that way. Ken is now the proud owner of her fancy house in an upscale neighborhood, and she cannot stop flaunting it on social media. Update 2. It happened as I predicted. Ken faltered on her promise and my parents came back to me crawling. As I pledged, I cut them off. Not only financially, but also in general. For weeks, I felt bad and conflicted, but I knew I had to stand my ground. I couldn't keep enabling their poor decisions, especially when they had chosen my sister's whims over their own financial security. Ken was over the moon after she bought the house. Of course, for the initial few months, she covered some of our parents' monthly expenses. I knew it wouldn't last, but I hope for their sake that I was wrong. However, it didn't take long for things to start falling apart. Ken and her husband quickly realized that the math was not adding up. How could it? She doesn't have a stable job. Her husband's job is stable but not high paying. The costs of the mortgage, utilities, children's education, and upbringing began to pile up. Within 6 months, she was struggling to make ends meet. The logic of using the rent money to cover other expenses suddenly didn't add up. They soon maxed out their credit cards. They asked my parents to fend for themselves because they could barely have a proper meal. My parents had saved a little from the money I used to lend them, but when it dried up, they started calling me again, first with subtle hints about how hard things were, then with more direct requests for money. I felt terrible for them, but I also felt vindicated. This was exactly what I had warned them about. After talking to them a few times, I ignored their calls and texts. I don't feel good about it, but still, I'm holding on to my ground for my own sanity. I know I'm being fair and just, but it's still hurting to see them suffer. Update 3. A lot of drama happened. Phew, where do I begin? A week ago, I received a call from my mum. I initially ignored it, but she persistently called. I sensed it was urgent, so I responded. She sounded desperate, her voice trembling. She told me Ken had sold the house and moved out of the city. I was like, so what? After I pulled the plug on her financial support, they went to Ken and gave her a choice. Either pay the monthly allowances I used to pay or give them back the money they had lent for buying the house. Ken, the entitled being, quarreled with my parents, and this time they didn't back off. Ultimately, she agreed to pay them a monthly allowance, but we know she was struggling financially, so how could she? Fast forward to 2 months later, they had another argument. My parents told Ken that she could no longer stay in the house if she wasn't going to support them and asked for a refund so they could move into an apartment and at least manage the rent. Her pride was hurt and she argued for hours. She yelled at them, but it was her money because they gave it to her, so she would do whatever she wanted with it. There was no way she was going to give it back to them. After the argument, they weren't on talking terms for some time, but Ken found herself in another pickle. Her husband, who was already burdened with expenses, filed for bankruptcy. She had no choice but to sell the house, but being a typical greedy person, she didn't want to share the sale proceeds with our parents. So she quietly sold the house and left the city. My parents were left in the lurch, without money, without support, and now without a daughter nearby. When Mum narrated this, I was filled with anger, but also pity. I felt terrible. But this was the consequence of their own actions. Yet I couldn't bring myself to say, I told you so. Mum asked me for help again, but I calmly told her that I would no longer support them. I made it clear that I was done being their financial crutch, and I urged them to consider selling their house, downscaling, and moving to a more affordable place. It was harsh, but I had to let them face the reality of their actions. It took a while, but I think it finally sunk in. They realized that they couldn't keep relying on me or anyone else and that they needed to take responsibility for their choices. My parents eventually sold their house, moved to a smaller apartment in a cheaper neighborhood, and are now living off the proceeds. It's not a luxurious lifestyle, but it's sustainable, and they are managing. It's not the outcome I had hoped for, but it's better than being destitute. As for me, I still feel conflicted about everything that happened. I hate that it had to come to this, but I know I made the right decision by cutting them off. It was the only way to get them to wake up and take responsibility for their lives. I hope they will manage well, but I am done being their financial safety net. They have Ken to thank for this. That's all for today. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and share your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you.